Welcome to Bus Speakers. I'm Kush,
I'm Alex.
and today we're going to be talking about mega genres. So, in music, there are mega genres like hip hop, rock, jazz, pop music that don't
And
really.
like classical, jazz, ambient, reggae even, I guess.
But those albums don't really like have specific artists that fall under those genres. So we say, like, you take a rock artist, let's say, like, anyone will fall under a subgenre of rock or a subgenre or go on, whatever. And a lot of people have been arguing that there are strictly rock musicians, which I want to say no, there are not. Everyone falls into a subgenre.
Okay, well, my view of this is kind of not very dedicated to one side or the other. It's definitely a case-by-case basis, and it's also down to exposure. Okay, well, I'll say what I mean after you put across your main argument, Kush, because I know you have the most to say about this.
So, like, a lot of people will say, oh, bands like The Doors or The Who or Rolling Stones are strictly rock musicians. But I don't think that you can say that because, at least for the let's take the Rolling Stones for example. Each album they have has a different sound, and so by putting them strictly in just rock would be kind of doing them an injustice. Like their newest album was as blues rock as it gets, and I think for the most part throughout their career they fell under blues rock. I mean, I know they have some kind of mix-ups, other genres too, but I think for the most part they're a blues rock.
This is down to exposure again. I've heard their whole discography, the Rolling Stones, and if I had to define them in one genre, it would be that. Okay, but I mean, in the 80s they had just synth pop almost albums, kind of with Undercover, and they weren't synth pop, but they may as well have been. And Some Girls, that album that has a country song, it has punk efforts, it has a disco song. I don't think that has one song. It has a country song. I mean, it goes everywhere. That album, and it does go one or two songs to blues rock. So, in that case, I'd say they're a blues rock band that are conscious of other genres and experiment around. Like they have ballads as well. But yes, generally they are blues rock, in a way.
But yeah, so that's my argument. And even with not even just rock, but like hip hop too. Like there are not any strictly hip hop artists. There are like East Coast, West Coast gangster rap or conscious hip hop, cloud rap, whatever it is. And I think there aren't any strict hip hop artists either.
This is down to, like I said earlier, exposure. Okay, what I mean by that is how exposed we've been to something. If you've never listened to rock and you just ever, like on even one rock album, you just hear it in passing on the radio, you're not going to be able to define what the difference between hard rock, industrial rock, I don't know why that'd be on the radio, country rock, AOR, there's hundreds of subgenres, that's what you mean. And what I'm thinking of is I have no experience with classical, very little with jazz, and I know that there are subgenres in those two, mega genres. Classical has like romanticism, minimalism, and I think third stream, which is like a combination with jazz. But if you play me a classical song, I will not know the difference between any subgenre. It's all classical to me. So just because I've not been exposed to it, I don't think I could tell the difference, but there definitely are subgenres. So, and jazz as well, like there's jazz fusion, smooth jazz, cool jazz, hard bop, free jazz, experimental jazz, I guess, even new jazz we were talking about in the genre generator game. There are subgenres, and I'm a bit more experienced with jazz than classical, but I'd still struggle to really be confident naming the different subgenres. And country, I'm a bit more experienced with. I could tell the difference between alt country, Americana, country pop, I guess, outlaw country, even though in general that's like one genre. Ambient has subgenres as well. Dark ambient, ambient pop. I don't know why I'm naming them off the top of my head when there's clearly millions more if you look for them. There's even one like glacial ambient. I don't even know what that is. But you know what I mean? Do you not think it's down to exposure? Like, if a guy...
My argument is that it's not that we would know what they're saying. I'm saying that in general, you can't really say that there is just a... Like, let's say we're well versed in all music genres. There wouldn't be an artist who is strictly a rock musician. That's what I'm saying. Now, people will argue that there is, but I don't think there can be.
I'm just saying these terms only exist because most people are uninitiated in the subgenres to tell the difference. That's the only reason why rock music still exists as a very popular and will always exist as a really popular term, because most people aren't going to know the difference between indie rock and hard rock. Well, they might know the difference, but they don't care enough to understand and properly tell the difference between those and all other subgenres of rock and pop. It's all going to be rock music to most people unless you look into it. That's why the genres exist. As far as if there is an artist that is rock, I'm going to say not really, because everyone goes under rock, but since they are subgenres, they kind of still are rock, like in general, the whole sound, but just rock, probably not.
Well, because there are rock aspects to every song that is in the genre. I'm just saying that there isn't one that is strictly rock, because they all have influences like hardcore or punk is even a rock subgenre, but you wouldn't consider it a rock music, so...
Okay, yes, I agree. The other thought I had with this, an example of what I'm saying with exposure, is that I was watching a David Letterman interview with Phil Collins. As you can tell, I lead a very exciting life. And he was talking about which rock and roll musicians have successfully had a career in film, because Phil Collins was, I don't know, plugging some film he was doing. And he said people like Elvis and Dusty Springfield, and he was like, that's not necessarily rock and roll. He was still calling it rock and roll liberally in the mid 80s, when rock and roll was a very dead genre. Like, Elvis is dead. You know, I know that, I don't know, Stray Cats had a few hits, and like Shakin' Stevens in the early 80s, but rock and roll, you know,
yeah, it's
dead. Not very it's dead in the late 50s. That's a dead genre. It progressed into rock. But he was still calling it rock and roll, which makes me think David Letterman's experience with rock music is so limited he can't tell the difference between... And there was loads between rock music subgenres that existed in the 80s. And there was loads in the 80s. I mean, that was new wave, I guess, is kind of rock, even though it's more pop. But Phil Collins, you know, he's definitely on the smooth pop side of things, and he was calling the music he's making rock and roll. That's very wrong. I'm just saying, I really think there is something to say about why these mega genres exist as loose terms used liberally in this day and age, is because of people not caring about the difference of subgenres. Like if you said half the subgenres of any genre, no one's going to know the difference. Electronic music is probably the mega genre of like EDM, techno, garage, house, even ambient kind of is connected to that. You know, there comes a point where genres are just labels.
Yeah, and I think personally I don't really look at genres that much. I just listen to what I like. I'm just saying that because you can classify things into like more precise, accurate measurements. Like, I don't know, I feel like you calling the Ramones a rock outfit just doesn't make any sense. Or calling what do you call it? Like calling the Beatles a pop group, and given the Beatles are a pop group, but they don't fall in the same pop as like Meghan Trainor, which I hate making that comparison because they're two vastly different artists. But they're both pop artists, and despite their sound being absolutely completely different, I think it's just a weird idea.
Definitely. I was just thinking, punk. Would you consider that a mega genre?
Yeah, I don't
But
know,
that comes from rock, definitely. So that's weird.
cause like I would think the Clash and the Ramones, like the very early punk outfits, there wasn't really subgenres to begin with, were there?
Well, the only kind of one is like proto-punk, which is a whole other thing. Proto-punk is just rock, hard rock, garage rock songs that sound punk, like before punk became a popular term, basically.
Yeah, cause like I don't know. It might be, but I have to probably listen to some more Ramones or Clash or whatnot to classify it properly.
I think there is something to be said about exposure, though, why these terms exist.
I do agree. I
Classic.
think for existing terms, yeah, just because it's easier to call something rock than be like, oh, but this is indie revival garage rock. Like, no one knows that. No one cares about that.
Except the press trying to make. That's why I think these terms exist, because the press want to make something a movement, like grunge and Britpop.
I
They wanted to make those movements in music, and grunge is just alternative rock with punk elements, is basically how I see that. And Britpop is literally just pop rock done in the 90s. There's no reason why that's a genre, and made by British people, I guess. There's no reason why that's a different genre from pop rock. Again.
But yeah, I think I can agree with that. Genres are just a government conspiracy.
Oh yeah, there's too many conspiracies in music. I mean, we'll probably discuss some in future discussions, but so us too,
isn't
definitely trying to make.
Isn't there that one conspiracy like all the great musicians die at like age 25 or something like that? Like
27 Club.
Yeah.
Okay, we could talk about that one day, but 27 Club is Jimi Hendrix, Jim Morrison from the Doors, Janis Joplin, Brian Jones from the Rolling Stones, Kurt Cobain, Amy Winehouse. That was a weird one because that's pop and everyone else is distinctly rock. I don't know, just die at 27. But then I think of all the musicians who do die at that age, because there are quite a few, because they have a lot of drug problems, some die in crashes. I mean, that definitely only existed because the four principal members, Brian Jones, Jimi Hendrix, Jim Morrison, and Janis Joplin, all died within a year and a half of each other. That's the only reason this term exists.
Yeah.
And at the same age. Literally the only reason. And then Kurt Cobain and Amy Winehouse are like, I don't know, post editions.
Yeah, I don't know. It's a weird conspiracy, but I've heard a lot about it. But I don't really buy into it. So
Nothing to buy into. It's just, this is all I mean. The press make things up to glorify music more than it needs to be. The music stands on itself. We don't need weird mythical legends. Like, yes, Ozzy biting the bat's head, that's kind of cool, but that was something he did. The press didn't, well, I guess the press kind of made it seem like a real bat. But, actually it was a real bat, but he didn't know. But, yeah. It's really weird.
well, that's it from us. Thanks for tuning in to Busted Speakers. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you like and subscribe. Let us know what you think about mega genres in the comments below, and check us out on social media.